Good morning, everyone. Come on in. Come on in, everyone. The doors have closed. That's our cue to start. So we're going to be studying about Sarah this morning. I was just told by Deanie that that's one of her special women of the Bible. So if I finish a few minutes early, we may let her tell me everything that I messed up, and then we'll revise as we go. But I'm really excited to do this. I will ask for you guys to bear with me, maybe forgive me just a little bit. Brett and I just got out of middle school class, and we were teaching characters in there. And it felt like every class we were just trying to one-up each other on cringy jokes, trying to make the kids laugh. Our kids are in there, so the more we embarrass them, the better. So if a little bit of that bleeds through today and you feel like some of this is, I'm being silly, bear with me. Trying to have fun and trying to help you guys remember key points of this character just like we did in the middle school group. So bear with us. It's a great study, and really looking forward to going through this. Mark and I recently did the first 12 chapters of Genesis, so it was really nice to kind of go into the next 12 chapters of Genesis, dive in a little deeper, and study this great character, Sarah. In Hebrews 11, verse 11, it says that it mentions Sarah as a great woman of faith, and it says, "By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised." So even as we go through this study, we'll see some moments of Sarah where it might seem like her faith may be hanging by a thread at certain moments. There's the laughing moment. We all remember the times where she and Abraham lied, and then some anger that she'll display towards Hagar. Just keep in mind, even if we may disagree on some of the points or we may see different things in her character, keep in mind that God's final word on the matter is that Sarah was faithful. That she received her gift from God because she considered God faithful to His promise. And that's the final word on the matter from God, and He knows her better than we do, right? One of the reasons I love the study of Sarah is, to me, Sarah is incredibly faithful, but there's an approachableness to her faith. We can maybe see ourselves in her in many ways, not just women, but men as well. And there are some characters in the Bible where we don't get a chance to see any of the mistakes that they made. We recognize and we realize that they certainly made mistakes. Only one was perfect. But we don't get a chance to see those mistakes laid out. We may not get a chance to see the growth of those characters. And we get to see that with Sarah. And it's one of the reasons why we can't be too harsh to judge in these weaker moments or the difficult times where we didn't quite hold fast to the faith as strong as we should. None of us want to be judged by things that we did when we were younger necessarily, in high school. Having married someone who was in high school and attended this congregation, I get to hear stories about some of you. And some of us taught some of you in high school and have seen you grow up into decent people. None of us want to be held to that same standard for the rest of our lives. The silly things that young married people do that I did, made those mistakes, learned the hard way, and have come out on the other side of it. I remember in high school, I was meeting a group of guys. I think I was 1 year after Florida College. It was summer. I was meeting a group of guys. They said, "Hey, do you want to go? My family owns this little field. We're going to go out there and shoot fireworks." It was a couple days after the 4th, leftover fireworks. Let's go shoot them off. That sounds awesome. These guys were Athens Bible School students. This will be great. So I go out there, and they left out a key important detail of the let's go shoot fireworks. They meant let's go shoot fireworks at each other. And so I'm out there, and before I know it, it turns into a war. I'm ducking and dodging and diving away from every Roman candle shot and all these things. And I'm thinking, this is about a month before I meet Megan for the first time. The woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, I'm a month away from meeting her. Would she have dated me if I had no eyebrows or eyelashes? Because a Roman candle to the face took them away? I actually knew somebody in high school who lost eyelashes and eyebrows because of a firework. So, of course, I was dodging and ducking and diving real well that day. But all those people that were there are now deacons of their respective congregations in the church. We can't be held to that standard. One of them actually, his son just won WrestleMania at camp. And I understand him to be a really good kid, and his dad was a really good person, but he instigated the whole thing, just so you know. If we judge too harshly for these moments of not so great decisions and not so great faith, we don't get a chance to see the growth, and we won't give people the credit that they deserve for their growth, and more importantly, we won't be giving God the credit for the growth in certain people's characters. God's always working on us and working with us. And His timing is only for Him to understand and not for us. So we get a chance to see all of this when we study this great woman of faith, Sarah. And Abraham is always seen as a great man of faith, and rightfully so. He's always seen as the father of God's chosen people. But we need to make sure that we see Sarah in the same way as the mother of God's chosen people. They say behind every faithful man or every great man is a faithful and great woman. And we'll see that God chose them both for His purpose, not just Abraham. I'm hoping that if I go through this, as I go through this, that I present Sarah's story pretty well to you guys. And we'll have some fun in the process. You'll see what I mean as I go through my outline. And at the end, I'll give you some take-homes, some things that we can learn from this whole story. Most importantly, understanding even more the character of God. So, without further ado, let's move into our lesson. So, we begin learning a little bit about Sarah. And what do we know about Sarah? The first thing is that she is beautiful. She is faithful and she is passionate. We're going to turn to Genesis 12, if you will. We're going to start in verse 10 and read down through verse 16. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they'll let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. And when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. So at this point, how old is Sarah? Does anybody have any idea how old Sarah would be at this point? 65, around 60, 65. So in her case, we're talking middle age. Now she was beautiful, apparently. The kind of beauty men will kill for, right? I mean, Abram knew, you are so beautiful, they will kill me and take you. So they felt the need to lie and say that she is indeed his sister in order to protect themselves. Now Sarah went along with this plan. I'm talking to the wives right now. Wives, has your husband ever had a plan that he was so sure was going to work and you just let it go? And you just let him do it, knowing the whole time it wasn't going to work? You just let him go and watch him dig deeper and deeper and deeper into it? It's okay, you don't have to shake your heads. I know you've done it. Maybe he's like, no, this is the way, I promise. This is the way we should go. And you're like, okay. And you end up in a totally different state before he finally realizes, okay, we've made a mistake here. I should have listened to you all along. It happens, unfortunately, to me all the time. Yeah. Sometimes it takes boys and men longer to learn things, I've found. She's very passionate as well. So not just her beauty, which was obviously stunning and amazing into her middle age, but a very passionate woman. And we see that when we study the story about Sarah and Hagar. So I'm going to start in chapter 16 now. We're going verses 1 through 6. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarah said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. So we get to see some of this passion that Sarah has. She loves Abraham deeply. She loves God. She's faithful. She's maybe trying to make this promise happen. You might say that storms are brewing in her eyes. You might. You might not. I don't know. Women, if you are a passionate and loving woman, at some point you may lose your calm and your poise too. You don't have to show your hands, but women, have you ever felt like you've kind of lost your poise or lost your calm or lost your ability to be rational? That's okay. Sometimes that happens. We see this with Sarah, and we see that you can still be a great example of faith and sometimes want to burn down your home. It's quite all right. Women, it's okay if sometimes you look around and you start thinking, "I'm going to pack up everything and leave." It's all right. I always told Megan, you go wherever you want, do whatever you want, just promise me you'll come back. That was it. I understand you've been with the kids all day, go and do. Just promise me that you'll come back and we're good. Whenever she says, "Is it okay if I..." Yes. The answer is always yes. Go, recharge, come back and help me do this thing. So it is all right, women, to have passion and to show that as Sarah did in this moment. And men, if you are married to or you're just extremely close in relationship with a passionate woman, don't be surprised if that passion turns against you at some point. At some point, you may be the target of that passion when she turns it and says, "May it be on you. May the wrong be done to me be on you." Don't be surprised. So what are we called to do in those situations, godly men? We can learn a lot from Abraham here as far as what we're told. What are we called to do in those moments? We love her. We honor her. We cherish her, and we show tenderness to her. That's how we win, gentlemen. That's how we care for our wives and our close women, sisters, or whoever it may be. We don't provoke. We certainly don't try to stifle any of that passion or put out that flame, because that serves the family so well for that passion. We're not given a whole lot on how Abraham handles this exactly, but this is how I see it. Sarah, I understand why you feel this way. I'm with you in whatever you think we should do about this. And I believe this is a very tender response from Abraham to Sarah. Now, he could have said, "Hey, what are you talking about? This is your idea. What are you, crazy? What's wrong with you? Why are you acting so unreasonable? Why are you acting crazy? How is this my fault? You have no right to feel this way." Men, if you've never experienced trying to tell your wife how to feel, go ahead and swim with alligators instead. I promise you, it'll be less painful. If you're younger and you haven't tried it yet, try it and let me know how it goes. If you're my age or older, you're probably shaking your head because you have tried it, and you know you'd rather swim with alligators than do it again. Abraham allows her to feel the way she feels. He understands the challenge that they were facing because of this decision. This is where we typically see something or hear something that we've heard before, where we say, a half-truth is a whole lie. Anybody ever heard of that before? A half-truth is a whole lie. Well, we saw in Genesis 12, when they went to Egypt and they lied about Sarah being Abraham's sister, it's revealed again in Genesis 12 that in the land of Gomorrah they do the exact same thing again. But this time Abraham justifies it. In verse 12 of chapter 20, he says, "Besides, she is indeed my sister. the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So he's like, it's kind of true. She kind of is my sister. So this is where, in this section, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the things they did, some of the decisions, some of the wrong decisions that they may have made, but in no way causes Abraham or Sarah to be considered anything but faithful servants to God. Just some of these moments we get to see before their growth, before God completes their faith and helps them to grow into the faithful people that they have been and will continue to be, and we know of today. And so that is a situation where there is some truth to it, but it is still an absolute lie, meant to deceive, and they believed that they had to protect themselves. And in some ways we may see that as a lack of trust in God, that God calls us to just walk the truth in love, to trust Him in everything, and they still felt the need to protect themselves. And you can see that slight weakness in faith when we see in those two examples of lying in the foreign lands. They believed, I believe that they believed, that God was faithful to His promises, but that they still needed to lie for self-preservation. In the first one in Egypt, that lie led to even more trouble, didn't it? It led to, presumably, them receiving the Egyptian slave Hagar, who then causes more problems for the family as well. And so we read about Sarah and Hagar, and we read that a few minutes ago. Clearly, Sarah is growing tired, exhausted of waiting for this promise of God. She knows that God has made this promise to Abraham. I'm assuming they discussed it, being a married couple. She knows about it, yet she's barren. She hasn't had an opportunity to have kids. She can't figure out, what is going on. Is this promise even about her? Maybe she's supposed to take this woman, give her to Abram, and that's how they would have a child. Maybe that's God's plan. So they jump the gun a little bit. They decide to go ahead and give Hagar to Abraham. She's been barren her whole life. Now she's 75, 76 years old, and she must have just wondered, maybe this is just God's plan is for Abraham and it's not for me. Maybe I'm not supposed to have a son. Maybe this is the way. And so she believes this is the best way. Now we get a chance to see the whole picture. That's the beauty for us. Even when we look at the Bible as a whole, the advantage we have is that we get to see the whole picture. We get to see God's plan start to finish. And it's so difficult, and we can't be too harsh on these people that couldn't see all of that at that time the way that we can now. She believed this was the best way. Maybe this was God's plan. And it was not the best decision. It just led to more pain and resentment for Sarah, who's already going through so much. We've got to imagine what Sarah has gone through, what she goes through in her lifetime. Just the death of Lot's wife and having to deal with that. They were family. So we would expect that Sarah was very, very close to her. She's helping raise this slave woman's son, Ishmael, who would become a wild donkey of a man, and she's involved in that raising. We have this situation. We have the lying in Egypt. She's taken by the Pharaoh. She's taken by the king in Gomorrah. There's so much going on in her life that, like I said, it could be very difficult not to make some of the decisions that they made. But Abraham loves and honors Sarah. And that becomes such a critical point in their lives, is that love and that honor continues throughout everything. So God's going to include Sarah in the promise to Abraham over in chapter 17. I'm going to start with verse 1, reading through verse 8. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you and may multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Skipping down to verse 15. And God said to Abraham, As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. And Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And God said, No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. So this is, I believe, the most critical passage in the story of Sarah, the moment where God actually not only names her as part of his promise, but actually changes her name to a more significant name. And we see the significance of the name. We see Sarah versus Sarai. Sarai means princess, or essentially the lady of one family, the matriarch of one family. But the name Sarah is a higher standing and a higher status. It is the princess of a multitude, many nations. Similar to Abram being father of many versus Abraham being the father of many nations. And so God is blessing both of them to be the foundation of his people, the chosen people that he would bring his Christ from. So we see the importance of this name, and in this moment that God himself changes their names. And we know about the importance of a name today. Think about the meanings of our names that we give each other, and they can be very powerful and very meaningful to us. I'm married to Megan. Her name means pearl, which is very nice. We named our children, one of our children we named Isabel, which is the Spanish form of Elizabeth, which means my God is an oath. What a great, great thing. And my name, Kenton, which means of the town of Kent. Pretty exciting stuff. Glad my parents really put some real thought into that one. It's amazing. Now, some of us have names that mean something. Mine, not so much. We see this great, great moment for Sarah, where Sarah knows now fully that this promise is for her, that the blessing of a son, that the blessing of nations, the blessing of land, that she's part of that with her husband Abraham as well. It's a great moment. When we go to Genesis 21, and we see the birth of Isaac, 21, 1 through 5. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So we see the birth of Isaac, and we keep seeing this theme of laughter. This theme of laughter. Isaac the name even means he laughs. So we see this theme over and over. And then in the next verse, we see Sarah's laugh. But if we go back to chapter 18 real quick, before we do that, Genesis chapter 18. In verse 10, the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. And now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh and say, Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard or wonderful for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh. I just love this interaction. If you don't love that interaction between the Lord and Sarah, I don't know. I love that. She's like, I didn't laugh. What are you talking about? Oh, no, you laughed. It's all right. But he doesn't deal harshly with her. He understands. You ever see young people younger than you do things that are just crazy, and you just want to pat them on the head and say, you know nothing. It's okay. I get it. Right? You hear young married couples think they've got it all figured out in marriage, and you're like, we'll see. We'll see where you are in 10, 20 years. We'll see. It's okay. You see teenagers think they've got the whole world figured out, and we're like, sure you do. All right. You know, there's this moment. It's like, oh, no, you laughed. But it's okay. I've got a promise. Nothing's too big for me. It's wonderful. And when you see it, your faith will go to another level. And that is, I believe, one of God's purposes here, that these people have considered themselves too old to do this, and God says, I promised you I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it in a way that shows you that I did it, and that you guys, that it wasn't because of their behavior, their activity, their faith. God did it because He is faithful. And so then back to chapter 21, in verse 6, just after the birth, Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And so now we're seeing laughter, but joyful laughter. Kind of laughter of a promise fulfilled after all these years. How old is Sarah at this point? 90 years old. So about 3/4 of the way through her life. I don't know what the average lifespan here is anymore, but think for us, maybe 60 to 65 years old, maybe even close to 70, conceiving a child. The feeling of overwhelm probably and fear, but great joy and laughter about this. All right. So at the conclusion of Sarah's life, Sarah dies at the age of 127. That's detailed for us in Genesis 23. And Abraham honors her even in her death. And we see throughout chapter 23, Abraham's looking for the perfect place to bury his wife. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for buying a burying place by the Hittites. He paid 400 shekels of silver for this land, and we find out later that it's where Abraham would be buried as well. It's where Isaac and Rebekah would be buried. It's where Jacob buried Leah. It's where Joseph buried Jacob. So this truly is a land and a tomb for the patriarchs of God's people. So a few take-home messages that I wanted to go over with you guys. Lessons that we can learn, things that we can gather from this lesson. And the first one is that God's promise will be fulfilled. God will provide. We will have missteps. We will make bad judgments. We will have momentary weakness of faith. We will have times when we're wondering, is God really going to do this? God's promise will be fulfilled. And for us, we know that we should always remain joyful and hopeful about the things that we could receive as blessings in this world. But we know that beyond that, God is faithful to what happens to us after this life. He's faithful to His promise that we will be with Him if we seek Him. If we live for Him, that we'll live with Him. He's faithful to that promise no matter what happens to us in this life. I was struck by this when reading this, and you see just how loving and faithful and tender God is. If you ever grew up with a notion that the God of the Old Testament was just a wrathful and vengeful God, and that's all He was, and that maybe He learned to be tender when he sent Jesus, and that God is what He has always been. Any amount of tenderness that we show comes from Him. Any amount of love and mercy that we give are characteristics of Him and from Him. And so we see these great moments where He could have easily gone after them for some of these decisions, but He is so unbelievably tender. And we should never forget, yes, He will take vengeance. Yes, He will blot out incredibly sinful people. We see it even, I skipped it, but in the middle of all this, we get the Sodom and Gomorrah chapter. And that's God really raining down His wrath on an incredibly sinful people. But to those of us that are faithful, to those of us that follow Him and are seeking Him and desire to be with Him and are doing everything we can to stay on that path towards Him, He's incredibly tender and loving. He's our Father. He's approachable. We can go to Him with all of our problems, all of our issues. We can go to Him even when we've been a disaster for as long as we've been, however long that may be. We can go to Him and He says, it's okay. You didn't know. We see in the New Testament, Jesus says, go and sin no more. One of my favorite passages, just go and sin no more. There's tenderness and there's mercy. And we see it all the way back to the beginning. We can't give in to hopelessness, despair, and disappointment. Sarah is another example of one of those people that could have given up. Maybe she made a few missteps along the way and tried to speed up or work around God's plan a little bit. But we cannot give in to hopelessness and despair and the disappointment that sometimes comes with life. Galatians 6 and verse 9 says, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. And we may feel that sometimes our capacity to experience God's blessing is missing, or things just aren't quite working out the way that we thought, or we're not even producing the kind of fruit we thought we did at a certain age. But it is just never too late. We can't despair. We can't give up. It's never too late to find and use our gifts spiritually, the things that we bring to the body of Christ, the things that we bring to each other. It's never too late to discover what those things are and utilize those. Believe me, if you're looking around the world right now, the younger generation needs the older generation more than ever before. Please don't despair, and please don't cease to give us your gifts and teach us how we can lead the church and the world into the future. Trust in God's timing and learn to wait well. That one's easy for everybody, isn't it? That's an easy one. We just trust God all the way, trust His timing, and be very patient and wait well. Have you ever heard, be careful about praying for patience? God may just see how far that your patience can go, right? We have to trust. We have to wait well. With Sarah's laugh, I don't really see that as a total lack of faith on Sarah's part. Yeah, maybe there was a little bit of sarcastic doubt with it, or kind of just oh, sure, okay. After all these years, these old bones are going to have a baby. I'll believe it when I see it. All right. There might have been a little bit of that. But don't we do this too? I mean, don't we get cynical about things finally happening for us? Imagine you finally get a chance to go on that dream vacation you've been longing for your whole life. Is there a little thought in the back of your head that says, the flight will probably get canceled. I'll probably get sick and I can't even go. Or maybe you get through all that, you're on the plane and the first sign of turbulence, you're like, okay, of course, the plane's going to crash. Of course. All this time, finally, dream vacation, we're going down. Of course. Why me? Or your favorite team is number one, they're crushing it, they got a chance to win the whole elusive championship, and you're thinking, they'll blow it. Somebody's going to blow out a knee. They're going to lose in the first round to something called St. Peter's. Somebody will probably throw a shoe and get a penalty and ruin the whole thing. If you ever talk to Jason about his team, they're either the best or they'll never win a game ever. They're the worst team that ever existed, right? There's no in between with Jason. They're either winning it all or they'll never win again. It's one of the two. We do this. Or what if your dream was to have your very own beach condo? Maybe it's on Crescent Beach in Summer House at a certain point on the south end. Maybe that's just too specific. Maybe that's me. You have this dream to actually own a condo that you can go to and spend time with your family with anytime you want. And you're probably thinking, I bet the largest hurricane in history is about to come through and wipe it out the moment I buy. As soon as I sign the deed, we'll read about this hurricane that's going to come and wipe it all out, right? Don't we have these moments, these sarcastic doubts about things that we're like, it's not going to happen for us, things are not going to work out. We have to learn to wait well. True godly patience isn't about going outside of God's will, trying to make things happen on our own. True godly patience is trusting Him completely. And waiting well means following God's plan fully, all the way. And waiting with hope and expectation that God actually fulfills His promises, as we know He does. Thank you guys for your attention. I hope that I covered Sarah fairly well and had some fun, and I hope that song is stuck in your head for the rest of the day. You are welcome. Thanks, guys.